morning. Welcome to our July Southern Dallas County Cities meeting. This month, we're going to talk about broadband, and we're excited to be here today. We've got two speakers today. Our first speaker is going to be Todd Furness. He's the CEO of GTC Group, which is a private investment firm. He's the founder of TFIP LLC, which seeks to correct social ills with regard to healthcare inequality. And his latest passion is identifying and correcting broadband inequity. And then after Todd speaks, Melissa Kraft is going to speak, and she is Dallas County's Chief Information Officer. She has over 20 years of experience in both the private and public sector, working for other local governments in the area. And then she's also a veteran and has served our military. So with that, I'll turn it over to Commissioner Price, and then Mr. Furness will be speaking.
Well, thank you, Alyssa, and to the Public Works Department, all of my Southern Dallas cities. Thank you for making the time. It is this was arranged so that the right hand will always know what the left hand is at least maybe not doing, but at least contemplating. And so we have two very prominent speakers as the national commentary around infrastructure. Broadband has kind of been an afterthought, at least locally. And when Todd Furness appeared before the Commissioner's Court, he, unlike no other presentation, as an invitation of my colleague, Commissioner Koch, brought this presentation to fruition. As a result, the county has moved to another level of engagement and has bought into the process, not only from just listening to the issues, but trying to be part of the resolution. And as I said, Lissa has adequately introduced Mr. Furness. So Mr. Furness, thank you for being with us. These are the cities that are impacted, and you made that very clear. And so I thank you for taking time today to be with us again.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Price. I appreciate your opportunity. You're giving me the opportunity to speak here. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. So this report was actually inspired by work on a prior report that I did on Parkland and how Parkland might be able to use its mission a little bit differently to make a greater impact. I've also, as some of you may know, I've written a book on healthcare reform that I'm really elated to report has reached bestseller status on Amazon in 3 categories this week. So the tie here is that broadband has been identified as a super determinant of health by both the FCC and Health and Human Services. What that means is that our nation and its two of its grandest bodies believe that broadband is essential to the health and well-being of the citizens of our country and the residents of our country. So with that, I'm going to revisit the report that I gave to the County Commissioner's Court on May 4th, which is the report you see before you. If you can turn the page there, Joel. Thank you. I want to start with defining broadband. Broadband is actually a reference to a set of a range of spectrum of radio frequencies. And so the term has actually been kind of co-opted, but I'll use the co-opted version of the term for shorthand. And what we mean by broadband is really a rate of speed of data transfer. And you'll see on the slide that, we started back in 1999 with an original definition of broadband that in today's world would be considered archaically slow. And that definition was 200K, not M, not G, but K, up and down. And that was changed in 2010 to 4 meg download speed and a 1 meg upload speed. And they believe that the telecommunications companies lobbied for that in part because they wanted a faster download speed, and they wanted to use the pipes to, or the cable pipes and cable, meaning cables at the time, to make or give access to people to the information they were looking for more rapidly to improve the quality of the experience. That definition was again changed in 2015 to 25 meg down and 3 up. So download speed is when you request information from a website or from a server somewhere. That's how fast the server gives the information to you. If the inverse of an upload speed is when you're moving a file out to someplace on the web. The belief is that the speeds are going to change again, and we believe that the FCC is going to change the speed to something like 50 meg down and 10 meg up. Now, having said that, there are 4 senators who've come out and requested a different definition of broadband, which is 100 meg up and down, and they want that to be adopted across all of federal government and make it a national standard. We'll see if that happens, but right now the definition is by the FCC is still 25 and 3. So if you can turn to slide 1, please, Joel, we can see what kinds of things we can do with the different rates of speed of transfer. At 5 to 25 meg, you can do casual browsing and email and social media. A goodly amount of what we would do on a daily basis, we can use those kinds of speeds for, and that's why we can use smartphones so effectively, whether it's 5G or a previous edition of the telecom spectrum. 25 to 50 meg allows you to use high definition 4K video, gaming, and some light work from home, but you really need 50 meg to do learning from home and to have home security devices operational, the Internet of Things and the like. And then if you really are trying to be a creative professional from home, you need even more capacity to go do that, meaning that to transfer files efficiently, you need a lot more bandwidth. You can change the slide, please. So, having said that, the definitions are a little bit misleading because that we see from the broadband service providers, because what those are optimum speeds or the greatest speeds likely to occur. It doesn't mean you're going to get that if you subscribe to it. And there are a number of things that affect the speed of data transfer. First of all, the technology, obviously, but there are other issues ranging from topography and geography and the host servers and the like that all affect transfer speeds. You can go to the next slide. The other thing that happens here, and this is something that many of us should be concerned about, is the FCC doesn't really have a lot of teeth to enforce the reporting requirements for the carriers. What that means is that in the event that they report wrongly information to the FCC, because they have an obligation to report every year what they're delivering to the communities they're serving, then if they report wrongly, then really not much happens. And there's an example I cite here of a company up in New York, in the state of New York, where they said that they were serving 62 million people with broadband, and in fact, they were serving about 1 million people, and they didn't file a report at all for many, many years. And then when they finally filed their report, and they finally got fined after a long period of nothing happening, the FCC fined them a grand total of $163,000, which is a de minimis fine for all intents and purposes. It doesn't really affect what they do. Now, to put icing on the cake, what happened was they filed the same information the following year. So it's like they didn't really even care about it. So we have a long way to go in terms of our regulatory impact, as well as what we can do in terms of reporting. Next slide, please. So this slide is a map that I want to kind of describe the map first, because we'll see this image on a going forward basis through the rest of this discussion. The map is of Dallas County, and you'll see a yellow ring around the center of Dallas. Dallas is in the center of that. The yellow ring represents 635. You'll see blue lines, and those are the DART rail lines. And you'll see a red line going from the upper right-hand corner of the slide to the left side of the slide, and that's I-30. And so I did that so that you'd have points of reference when you're looking at this map to understand what's going on with regard to the different areas. And for those who are interested, we could actually drill down to the census tract or census block level. So, Commissioner, as you're looking at this issue very microscopically or microeconomically, if you have a desire for a follow-up, we can do that for you and tell you exactly what's going on where. I have a 75-page report, as you'd expect of me, that stands behind this with that kind of detail available to you. But what you see here is that the darker shaded areas are where where broadband is not offered, and it shows you kind of how broadband is not offered ubiquitously to consumers at all. We can go to the next slide, please. Now, the important point here is that it's not a question of only what's offered. And just to hint at something, I anticipated that our good friends at one of the large carriers headquartered here in Dallas would take issue with this report. And so what I did is they said they offered it kind of all over the place to consumers and to businesses. And I specifically talked about what I call Southern Dallas, meaning anything below I-30, south of I-30. And I selected 10 addresses at random, one in each of several zip codes in the area that was under discussion. And I said 70% of those addresses did not have access, meaning the service was not available to them. There was no line available for them to tap into. So the messages coming from the carriers are a little confused and vague, and sometimes just flat out not correct. So we have some work to do there, even locally. Now, having said that, the question obtains whether or not it's available. Is it affordable? And what we found is that this is really the biggest issue we face right now. Is this not only is it available in limited areas, far more limited than we would like, and especially in terms of the crisis that we faced over the last 2 years, but it's also not affordable to a goodly percentage of our residents. We can go to the next slide. And this is really the tail of the tape. And what it shows you in the lighter colored areas is where we have a problem with affordability. And this is really a tragic situation because it's the 10-by-1 standard, meaning the census form didn't ask the right question. So we had limited data on whether or not what it deals with regard to the 2010 standard versus the 2015 standard. What we know is that this reflects how many people do not have access to the 2015 standard, and the reality is that in all probability they don't have access to the 2010 standard. So that means that people are not able to participate in the contemporary economy. It means they can't access education, they can't access jobs, they can't access healthcare through telemedicine and telehealth, or they have limited access, and they can't access the other attributes of the contemporary economy. So this, to me, is a glaring problem that we need to fix. Next slide, please. Now, this is, to me, a signal of how acute the problem is. In 27% of the tracts that we looked at, not that we looked at, in 27% of the tracts in Dallas County, the cost of broadband is greater than 3% of the monthly income of that household. So that is more than you would pay for your utilities. It's more than you might pay for education, and for many it might be even more than what they would pay for healthcare. So this is a very significant problem. And when we talk about affordability, that's obviously another barrier. So we have a technical barrier to availability, but we also have an economic barrier to availability. Next slide, please. And now, it's kind of interesting, perhaps, that a guy like me would be advocating that, looking at different models for satisfying this problem. And what I mean by that is, I'm typically an advocate of free market approaches to solving problems, but I also, hopefully, am a pragmatist in recognizing that the free market solutions aren't going to work here. And so we have to have a different view of what is going to be available. I'm sorry, I just got kicked out of Teams, so I'm going to try and get back in.
We can hear you. You've got a beautiful portrait there, and we can still hear you. So
very good. Thank you. So the issue that I'm trying to focus on is really making sure that we figure out a way to solve the problem, both technically or technologically, and in terms of the affordability. Sorry, I was trying to. I don't know what's going on, guys. So I'm sorry about that. So what slide are we on, Joel?
We've got the last slide up. Economic incentives do not support ubiquitous access.
Got it. I'm in the waiting room.
You're back.
Okay, great. We can go to the next slide. So what I've proposed, and what we are doing in one of my companies called the Center for Impact Indices, is we're actually measuring what I call the inequalities of social ills, rising out of social ills. So we created a company called Center for Impact Indices that measures healthcare access, for example, and we look at affordability and availability of healthcare services across the United States, and we do that at a microeconomic level as well. And we have done the same thing with broadband, and we're looking at quantifying access, both in terms of affordability and availability, and then highlighting that issue. So what this shows you is kind of the model for a metric that would allow us to measure that, and that does allow us to measure it. So we have this in place today. And obviously we have to take into account advertised fees and access to residential consumers, and we have to look at demographics, but we also have to look at the price on the right-hand side. So household income and the price of the service. Now, what people are interested in doing frequently now is diverting the conversation to what Jeff Bezos is doing and what or Bezos is doing and what Elon Musk are doing with satellite technologies. The reality is that those prices are going to be the same as they are today, which is basically you have to buy a $500 dish, and then it's going to cost you about $100 a month to subscribe. That's an unacceptable answer, in my view. It doesn't give us access at the affordability we need in order to propagate the use of the technology. Next slide, please. And I think this is these are the real hard statistics, and I would hope that people would take away these numbers. 2.56% is the average portion of monthly income spent on broadband. 27% of residents spend over 3% of their income on broadband, and 86% of consumers for whom satellite is the cheapest broadband offering have to pay about $100 or more a month. Next slide. Now this puts it all into stark relief. 73 tracts out of all the tracts in Dallas County are the only places where broadband is available to 95% of the folks in that tract and who pay less than 2% of their income. So that tells you that this is not a problem that's limited to the cities in Southern Dallas. It's a problem that all of Dallas County faces, and we, as a county, I think, need to address it. So again, I'm typically a free market guy, but I'm also a pragmatist. And what this speaks to me is that we have to have what I call a tapestry of solutions with different economic models. Maybe it's a public-private partnership in certain areas. Maybe it's an advertiser, a sponsorship model in other places. And we can use free market opportunities in private companies in other places yet again. But one solution does not fit all. Next slide, please. This problem is only going to get worse. If you take a look at the yellow on the left, that's the cautionary zone, meaning that this shows you the percentage of Dallas County not connected at different speeds. And on the right, you see the future. So the 25/3 is the 2015 standard, and you see how many people do not have access to that standard in Dallas County. And we theorize that the next standard is going to be 50/10, and very, very few people are going to have access to that. Next slide, please. So again, we need to have different business models. I think we also need to have better data on what's actually going on in our communities. And I would advocate that we do a survey for more granular and more contemporary data. One of the challenges we have is actually getting good data. We've looked at a bunch of stuff on that are filings with the FCC, and we've looked at census data and a bunch of other information. But I think that we need census data by doing surveys that'll be more accurate. We need to develop new local networks. I would advocate that we aggregate demand from Dallas County government, from DISD, from DART, from Parkland, and other philanthropic organizations, and we look at new business models across all of those. I think we have an opportunity to attract business sponsors to sponsor base stations for different kinds of technology distribution. I frequently have said, why don't we put WiMAX, for example, on top of school buildings or government or county government buildings and distribute Wi-Fi locally that way. And then we have to have networks that are funded with while sponsors benefit from marketing and PR campaigns where that solution would work. So in addition to public-private partnerships, we could also have philanthropic and other forms of distribution available to us. Next slide, please. The last thing we should consider is that by having this kind of network availability and Wi-Fi, and broadband availability, and we should think of, just to define our terms a little better, Wi-Fi typically is inside of a building, and what we're concerned about is coverage of all the buildings. So we don't want to have people thinking that Wi-Fi will solve the problem. Wi-Fi has a very limited range, so we need more connectivity. And we might want to think about moving towards a place where we have smart cities, where we can have interconnected sensors that can communicate on a continuous basis. We should have or consider having infrastructure put in place for the Internet of Things, and that can help with broadband access. We can help with energy distribution, everything from trash collection to traffic congestion, and I think we can also really reduce the digital divide and allow people to access the contemporary economy by virtue of the access they would have to broadband and the web. So I'm sorry for all the technical problems. It's kind of an indicator of the problem at hand. In many ways, it's a real metaphor for what we're dealing with. Commissioner, I'll turn it back over to you. Thank you so much for your time.
Well, we can't thank you enough for bringing this to the attention. I think a lot of times in government and public sector, we think we know what the solution is, and we really don't have a clue. I guess what I found interesting in any of the other cities that want to jump in before Ms. Kraft, you talk about the healthcare industry. And one of the issues that they continue to advance in terms of servicing an underserved community, which again, same zip codes for the last 3 decades, south of I-30, is telehealth. With these challenges, how realistically is telehealth?
Well, telehealth is realistic but it doesn't solve the problem you're speaking to if you don't have access. You're spot on with regard to your concern. My concern from a healthcare perspective is right now, people getting to their healthcare provider can wipe out a day's pay. I mean, it's not unreasonable to look at it that way, especially if they have to use public transportation. And, Commissioner, you know this better than me. I've actually done a lot of driving around Southern Dallas just to see things firsthand. And, it's not an area that I live in or I do business in. And so I go to restaurants down there and I drive around down there to make sure I understand a little bit about some of the challenges associated with the southern cities. But if you have to use public transport to get to your doctor, you're going to have a tough time. And the real bulwark of the transportation is oftentimes church vans, where churches are helping folks get to the doctor and the like. So telehealth is a great and galvanizing way to look at the broadband issue. But the other challenge we have, and oddly enough, is the insurance companies. Now that sounds like a strange thing for me to say, but the insurance companies have been real fierce in their opposition to telehealth because they feel like there's an opportunity for fraud. It can't be measured, and they don't like it. So they've been pushing back on telehealth extensively. So we have two issues. It's not just a broadband issue; it's also an insurance issue. So as long as the administration keeps in place the executive orders that have been passed by the current and the past administrations to allow for telehealth to occur, then we have at least only a technological problem. But if the executive orders go away, then several insurance companies have already said the day that executive order expires, they're eliminating any coverage. So to the extent that people are relying on insurance to cover the cost of their physician visits or their hospital visits, then that's going to be another problem.
Has the Center for Medicaid Services, or do they assume the same position? Medicare,
well,
Medicaid?
Yes, that's correct. Now, in certain states, though not to my knowledge, Texas, Medicaid and Medicare have mandated use of telehealth. So it's not a private insurance issue in those instances or in those states.
Are there any other questions of Mr. Furness? We know he's very busy and we appreciate him just sharing time with us. I'll tell you, in terms of being able to disseminate to not only my church communities, and this report has been one of the most eye-opening. The only thing I did not hear you talk about, and you talk about some finances, what do you even propose is going to be the economic starting line to be able to deal with this?
And are you talking about in terms of expense?
Yes.
Well, it's unclear to me because it depends upon the solutions that we're advocating. So, I think it could be anywhere from millions of dollars to, hundreds of millions of dollars. But I would hope that it's not that much money, because I would hope that we would encourage different kinds of technology coming in. So we could make a big dent with, and I'm just pulling a number out of my head. I think we could make a big dent with probably $10 to $25 million.
Okay. Well, it's
for example, one of the things that people don't realize is that DART lines already have fiber strung through them. Why can't we tap into that and make it and use it? My biggest concern is that, you started the conversation today, I thought, very eloquently by stating you want to make sure that the right hand knows at least what the left hand is trying to do. Mm-hmm. I feel like there's an opportunity for us to replicate that idea across certain of the government institutions like DART, like DISD, like Parkland, and see how we might be able to have those entities work together to solve this problem in part.
Okay. Any other questions of our guests? Todd Furness, the Chief Executive Officer for TFIP. Any other query with regards to?
Commissioner Price, we do
Yes.
have a couple of questions that has come through our chat box here.
Please.
And one of them is any recommendations on how we can leverage potential ARPA funding.
Not sure what the references to there. What is the ARPA funding meaning?
Well, and then there was kind of a follow-up question regarding should the focus be getting internet to homes or just better/free subsidized internet access in public areas throughout the city?
Well, I believe it needs to get to the home because especially where we have remote learning, and working from home is going to be increasingly the case. I think we need to get it to homes.
I would agree with that.
Now, one of the questions that was asked to me recently was, what about the pilot programs that were put out under the prior administration? The prior president signed a bill on December 29th, and it advocated, or it funded $300 million for pilot programs for rural areas that became that ultimately became an Office of Minority Broadband Initiatives issue in the Department of Commerce, which is understaffed. And so they're just now putting out requests for information. So it goes request for information, request for quotes, or request for proposals. That's a very long, time-consuming process to get through everything, and those have to be awarded on a competitive basis. So that's subject to the federal acquisition regulations, and my fear is that that's going to be 2 to 5 years away before we actually get something done. So I think we need to act. Far more aggressively and with a greater sense of urgency than we have seen from government so far. And I see that the ARPA was a reference to American Rescue Plan Act.
Yes.
And I am unaware of how we might be able to use or tap into any of those funds for broadband initiatives in Dallas County.
Well, when you made your presentation to the Commissioner's Court and a subsequent follow-up presentation, the court directed our court administration and a committee to take some of those American Rescue funds, and I think to the tune, and I asked yesterday, Mr. Heiko, to the tune of about $30 million to engage in the resolution of this issue. So that those appropriations have basically been set aside by this court in terms of moving forward as a result of your presentation.
Thank you very much, and that's fantastic news. So my numbers weren't too far off, and that's wonderful.
Yes. Anything else, Lisa, with regard to Mr. Furness? Anyone else?
I believe those were the only questions that I saw.
Okay, well, like I said, we know he's very busy. We appreciate your time. I do expect the court to follow up with you. We have a subject matter expert with CIO, but with regards, you're much broader and excuse me, and especially with this whole DART thing, we're still in the southern sector trying to get the route alignments to be able to service just basic transportation. And I know it's difficult for people to understand, but you can be on Elsie Faye Hagen's, formerly Hatcher in South Dallas, miss the bus and can't get to Martin Luther King for the next couple of hours. And transportation is still a major concern in terms of our community. So this, as you said, will begin to help tie all of those together. And so I am going to direct Mr. Martin and Mr. Heiko, I'm sure, and the committee to make sure that you're part of this engagement as we continue to go forward to try to resolve this issue.
Well, thank you so much. It's a pleasure and an honor to be able to serve the county this way. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Furness. Okay. Okay, Lisa. And as I said, I know he's busy. Our next presenter is in the house. you know, we're real fortunate to have Melissa Craft as the CIO for Dallas County. I mean, she gets it. She inherited the department from, well, let's just say she inherited a department with numerous challenges, but she has hit the ground running, and we're just glad to have her and know she's part of our team. So, Ms. Craft, you're up.
Yes, Commissioner, and thank you for the introduction, and thank you, Mr. Furness. You know, as we were talking about smart cities, so we'll go ahead and start to talk about what is smart city and what does that mean and how does that mean and integrate with what we do as cities and counties. So you can go to the next slide. So why do we focus today on smart cities? So today, 4.35 billion people live in cities. By 2050, 75% of the world's population will live in cities, and up to 1 trillion devices will be connected by 2023. Yeah, I say all this because eventually everything and everyone will be interconnected. You know, one of the things, you know, Mr. Furness said, even walking down the street, you know, you're going to see those light poles. Even in your house, you know, everything is going to end up being interconnected. So as we go through that, can you go to the next? So what are some of the key components of a smart city and what contributes to a smart city? Really, you know, part of that is laying out kind of those foundational elements as, you know, Commissioner Price mentioned, transportation's the key, you know, one of those key things. In order to have effective transportation, you got to have good roads, you got to have good segues, you got to have cities interconnected with highways, you got to lay out the groundwork. You also want to provide a high quality of life with regards to the people part, health, you know, everything around. Also, smart solutions overlaying some of those basic amenities and providing a clean and sustainable environment. So when we talk about smart living, we're talking about, you know, having sewage and sanitation, right? Being able to provide, you know, water, electricity, housing, you know, public open spaces where people can come and collaborate with. Also on the smart people side, which is kind of what we focused on today with Mr. Furness around broadband, right? Broadband is leveraged in many areas, right? Whether it's for schooling, for telehealth, for, you know, activities, for interactions between your families on a personal and professional level. We leverage that to make business decisions, to look up a menu, to, you know, even talk to each other. There's also things around smart mobility, right? You know, in order to be more effective with, you know, traffic conditions, with weather conditions, you know, and things, you know, that you would interact with on a daily basis, right? Whether it's transportation, traffic, also the walkability, being able to, you know, use different modes of transportation, whether it's a vehicle or a bike. There's solutions in place that overlay some of those basic amenities to make them easier, to make them faster, to make them more cost effective as too. And also on the smart environment, you have things around pollution, right? You know, we take a lot of power in a lot of our facilities. So how do we make those, you know, most effectively, or use, you know, electricity in a way where you're not leveraging as much, right? So there's things around renewable energy too, right? So you can make it more sustainable for, you know, our future generations and so forth. And also as far as smart economy. So, you know, what are some of the ways we can encourage economic development, right? Or ways we can encourage ways to, you know, bring in more businesses. You know, as we were talking about with some of the smart living, you know, a lot of manufacturing, you know, before, you know, as we're migrating more towards technology-based solutions, they're heavily dependent on things like broadband. So how do we continue to, you know, build those out? And also smart governance, you know, as far as, you know, how citizens, you know, expect cities to interact with, right? So, you know, some people might want to interact via Facebook, you know, in the same way you get your amenities when you're having a bank transaction. Some people still go into banks, but some people like to do it on their smartphones. So when they're going to, you know, get married or renew a driver's license or pay for a permit, you know, they're going to want that same level of expectation in a wide variety of ways. So, you know, as part of a city, you got to build that service based on what the citizens' requests and needs. Can you go to the next slide? So, you know, one of the things we were talking about today is broadband, fiber, and wireless connectivity. So let's talk about some of those and how that applies to, you know, what we do and how we work. So Dallas ISD, you know, they're focused on a program called Operation Connectivity, right? As the pandemic was hitting, of course, all eyes these around, it's not just Dallas, how do you provide accessibility to remote learning? How do you, are you able to check in on the students? How do you even give that learning process to facilitate in a different type of learning environment? So, one of the things they did a pilot program with Lincoln and Roosevelt High School. So they set up, infrastructure for over 100 families to try to see and leverage to see, can we use broadband? They also started to loan out air cards to facilitate some of that. So even during the pandemic, people can get the schooling they need. So, as part of that, they also brought in a consultant to kind of help in and assess kind of the current conditions. And these are some of the things that, when we talk about smart cities, right? Again, we're trying to just use technologies and means to provide a service, right? This is what we would consider smart people, right? As part of how do we leverage those technology, those pieces to provide better education, accessibility to education, to telehealth, to ways to do research, ways to be able to connect, maybe those specialists that might not be readily in that city or area. Maybe you need to go out more regional to get research done or so forth and so forth. So could you go to the next slide? So smart people, this is kind of what used to be 5-10 years ago. A good to have is now a need to have, right? Especially, over summertime when kids are out of school, they're going to want to continue to keep up, to read, to have access to resources, whether it's books, whether it's teaching material, whether it's just a way to have some of that social interaction or a way to just keep cool. So some of the things that some cities are doing. So for example, City of Dallas is, a great example of a jurisdiction. They provide free Wi-Fi hotspots. They also provide Wi-Fi, a lot of their park and recreation facilities, right? So what used to be an amenity as far as kind of your programming, Wi-Fi is one of those subset of it to be able to leverage that as a way to provide a service. Can you go to the next slide? So here's another one as far as kind of a smart environment when we talk about, electricity. So, within the city of Richardson, they use the $1 million federal grant. They established 150,000 energy monitoring system at 7 facilities from the city hall over to the public library. It helped to identify what some of those operational challenges and how to retrofit, as part of that. Once they kind of put that in place, they were able to see over $300K savings on energy bills, right? So now you can either repurpose that towards something else, then now you're reducing your everyday operation and maintenance costs. That's a good way of overlaying some of that smart city or smart technology for some of those basic amenities to make them a little more efficient. Can you go to the next slide? So here's another one, the Huff-Hines Recreation Center. They installed 91 solar panels using wind energy system and solar thermal hot heating. They also have electric vehicle charging stations and educational kiosks. Essentially, the building, 29% of it was done with recycled materials. So, what does that mean for the city? We were able to repurpose existing resources, as opposed to buying new and causing pollution within the environment. So, that's one way to look at it too. So for instance, my previous role was in the city of Denton. We had an airport, pollution was very high, and we caught the wind, right, between Fort Worth and Louisville. So one of the things we did was, how do we monitor in the pollution and try to kind of minimize that as much as possible, right? Between air thermometers and being able to do the timing and scheduling, they were able to reduce quite a bit of that at our airport, which, back then it was one of the 10 most highly utilized airports in the state. So, when you think of terms like that, how do you make it most efficient, as far as providing a safe and healthy environment for our residents, our citizens, and, the people that use our services as well. Can you go to the next? So as part of some of our next steps, I think as Commissioner Price mentioned, partnering with cities on broadband needs, as part of the ARPA funding, we are looking at, trying to look at this holistically where it's not piecemealed. We want to make sure as far as getting in those underserved areas, we're really trying to solve the problem. They're really trying to meet the needs. We're also working with NTXIA, developing a smart county strategy. They currently work with people like City of Garland, City of Mesquite, City of Irving, and kind of partner up and try to work on that to try to, again, we want to be intentional about our efforts, right? Smart cities, some vendors use it as a jargon. The way I think of smart cities, it's a means of how to use technology to make things a little more efficient. So we're going to start to work on that with a holistic approach, and also just participate with some of our nonprofits. How can we help? What are you hearing? Also partnering with Commit Partnership. So Dallas Health Authorities on there, City of Dallas, just partnering with our regional agencies and see how we can help, and how we can make sure we're all working holistically. So for instance, in talking with City of Dallas, and we meet with Dallas ISD next week, what projects are you working on, what projects are we working on, and how we can collaborate and share those common assets to really try to take a regional approach in solving those underserved areas. So Commissioner Price, that's really, as part of, what we had, from the county's technology perspectives, just really talk about what is smart city, what does that mean, how does it practically apply? There's other areas where we can focus on too from smart cities. So, if anyone has any questions, we can certainly talk through that too.
Okay. Any questions from Ms. Craft? Listen, we're kind of back there. I guess I didn't see in your okay results any kind of connection with regards to the smart cities. And again, this is southern cities. Is there a time that we need to do an assessment of the southern cities and see what it is and where they are with regards to this matter?
Yes, Commissioner, and that would be part of kind of the strategy piece, and also working with Ms. Blair. That's going to have to be kind of a partnership, right? As part of what's our assets within the areas, what are those kind of key pain points, right? So for instance, Commit Partnership, they launched an outreach initiative. As we're working with this, what are some of the things we're hearing from a city's perspective, from a resident's perspective? How do we start to overlay and prioritize that? And then figuring out what's our current state, as far as what's readily available there. And then, how do we collaborate to get us to our to-be state, right? And what are our options to get there? I think Mr. Furness did a really great job of explaining that. There's different models that can get us there, whether it's a public-private partnership, whether it's, just giving accessibility to the right-of-way, or even working with some of the internet service providers. I think there's options there on how to address that.
Well, usually when we talk about this, we talk in terms of City of Dallas. We talk in terms of DISD. And I don't know, and maybe I need a little further education with regards to Commit, because again, this is a Southern Cities presentation. We're the ones that are below the, I call it the Mason-Dixie line. Some people call it I-30, same thing. But we're the ones that's challenged. And so therefore, we are the ones that are most impacted in terms of the lack of economic viability, et cetera. So I guess I'm looking for a carve out for southern cities, even though Mr. Furness talks about there's only 17 tracks that basically deal in the county. But we're the ones that are impacted, and so I guess I'm looking to you, Ms. Craft, and or Ms. Blair, to do a carve out for the southern cities, yes, so that we began to get them engaged, as part of this this whole broadband piece. Okay. Any other questions of Ms. Craft?
Commissioner, this is Alberta. Blair.
Yes, ma'am.
And just to add to Ms. Craft, we one of the things that we're doing is we're talking to all of our utility providers, just having general conversations, and just getting feedback from. Definitely, we have our monthly meetings with Ms. Craft to kind of go over some of the top high top items as well. So we will continue the collaboration, provide feedback, and come together with the IT department and provide more feedback on this. But we just like I think many of us, we're in the process of learning, and so that's what we've been doing in the last couple of months.
Well, what I want, and again, this is similar to another department in Dallas County that I weighed in on their budget the other day. You know, if we need some assistance, now is budget time, even though I've talked about the appropriation allocation that the court has embraced. I guess what I'm looking at, I'm not trying to load up Ms. Craft with any more on her plate, or you. And as you said, while she may have some of the subject matter expertise and knowing, I'm looking for someone who can focus and help the cities, help us in a way that, again, does not overload, your departments in terms of your day-to-day, just, keeping the engine running. And so I guess that's what I'm saying, both to Ms. Blair, Ms. Craft, it's budget time. If she tells me I need someone else to do a gap analysis in terms of where all of this needs to fit together, and she's willing to do a statement of work of what we need, that's what I'm looking for. I don't want this to be, this presentation is great. I think we've disseminated it. And hopefully our cities are on this morning. We've got about 38 attendees. I'm glad to see that. But at the end of the day, Dallas County, I'm expecting Dallas County to be the pencil ahead and to frame the solution. The court has demonstrated that they're serious about the matter. And so we're taking that American Rescue money, and that's what it's designed to be, part of infrastructure. Nothing is more critical based on either Mr. Furness or Ms. Craft in terms of how we move forward. Yeah, we like to have a new trail or thoroughfare, but at the end of the day, this is, as both Lissa, Mr. Furness, Ms. Craft, this is about the home, and then we go from there. So that's my task charge to the youth. Lissa, were you going to say something?
We'll do, Commissioner. One of our key objectives and results for next year is to conduct a survey to engage with citizens and residents in our sister agencies to see kind of what are the needs around digital services, and we can definitely make broadband, on top of that, just make sure we're gathering kind of the necessary elements to make sure we can kind of capture the current state. So.
But you don't have that capacity in house. I guess that's what.
Oh, no. We would definitely recommend to outsource that and try to get a consultant in to help kind of craft what that would look like for sure.
Okay.
And one thing, again, this is Alberta Blair again. One thing that we're doing is we are trying to line up consultants right now, Commissioner. Okay. We're working on indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity. We haven't gotten it out yet, but we are working on that just to bring in some consultants that can assist on the IT side, and specifically more so on our side for GIS. But we could add that as part of our scoping. And add that as well, so we can work with Ms. Craft, because again, this is a new area. This is another territory for us. Smart cities is something that we've looked at from just from the utility side, but we definitely need to collaborate with Ms. Craft here.
Okay. Any other comments from any other of the attendees, cities?
We have had some questions that have come through our Q&A.
Okay. Sure.
And if there's any other questions, feel free to type in to that Q&A box if you think of anything as we're speaking. Of course, somebody is asking if the slides will be available after the presentation, and yes, they will be. Another question was there any Texas legislation recently passed which would impact broadband infrastructure or service access?
Well, if you want to call it that, they went through the motions of creating a broadband office. And looks like the biggest challenge was where were they going to put the office? I did not see any appropriations associated with the placement of the office, but the legislation did pass to create a broadband. You know, and I tell people all the time, you know, Texas is basically rural. I mean, you know, they know some of us are here in the city, in the urban areas, but Texas is rural, and that whole urban, that broadband focus was really about the rural areas. I mean, that's where that was the genesis of the focus of the broadband. But no, I mean, yes, they passed the bill. I don't know. I don't think any appropriations really associated. And right now, it was between the comptroller's office and I think it was the University of Texas. So they were trying to decide. But that right now, I think that's the essence of the Broadband Act, unless staff or somebody else knows something a little more than I do, which is not hard. Okay, so sure. Go ahead, Alyssa, please.
There's another question here. Any particular recommendations regarding how municipalities and entities such as DART might work together to expedite the desired outcomes? There's kind of a follow-up question related to that, Melissa. Before you get started, it says, can we leverage fiber infrastructure owned by DART, DISD, TxDOT, and cities to make this happen?
Yes, the question would be yes. You know, actually, you know, City of Denton partnered up with Denton County and also Denton ISD. There was an area that everyone needed access to. So as part of that kind of partnership and working in that public-private partnership, they worked with the fiber company. So what the fiber company did, they carved out some of the services where the city and the counties can leverage, and some of the remaining fiber was kind of for their own use, right? So it was kind of a collaborative partnership there. So as a result, City of Denton, we were able to get a disaster recovery facility, you know, in Louisville for a 911 service. Denton ISD was able to kind of reach out to their newly high school that they were trying to establish. And, you know, Denton County was able to transport that. So, you know, that was a model where, you know, you can leverage and just collaborate together to try to see how can we best utilize what's in the ground, right? And, you know, I've seen other entities do it via right-of-way access or just having those conversations. So, you know, for instance, in City Denton, we were trying to create a new tech incubator, like a co-working space. So as part of trying to get connectivity, working with DART, you know, one of the things we found out, they had ready access in that facility, but we also needed access to go down one of our main corridors. So kind of working through that, you know, we were able to kind of get that done. So it's not impossible. It really takes, I would say, a collaborative effort between cities, counties, and DART trying to work through that. You know, there's a thing called permit and zoning and what I would call red tape to get there. But if, you know, everyone's willing to come to the table and really target that area and zone, you know, like one of the things Commissioner mentioned, we have funding that we're really trying to put and try to solve this problem. I'm sure, you know, we can come up with something good. So.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's all the questions that we have received here. And we really appreciate everybody's efforts and their presentations. It's really been interesting and enjoyable to listen to. As far as next month goes, Laura Freeland is going to talk to us and give us an update on a related topic, which is the Inland Transportation Agency. So we're excited to hear from her and to hear about the routes that Commissioner Price referenced earlier. And that will take place on August the 19th.
Okay. Well, Alyssa, as always, and public works staff and the Dallas County family, and all of you, my southern cities, you know, I'm real proud of this county. I continue to see this county moving forward and doing the kind of common sense, everyday, practical thing that are going to get to our constituents and make us a desirable place to live, work, and play. The only thing that always bothers me about all of this, the cyber stuff, of course, is security. And of course, that's all part of the being baked in. I mean, if we're going to move forward, there are going to be, you know, some risk. But without those risks, we will definitely not advance. We will be, you know, left in the dust. So thank all of you. Thank you, Ms. Kraft.
Excuse me, Commissioner.
Sure.
Do you mind? I think there's one more question,
Oh, okay.
Alyssa,
Sure.
that I think was missed.
What question was there?
Alyssa.
Okay. Yes, it says usually when discussing multimodal, oh, where did that one go? Hold on a second. Usually when discussing multimodal transportation, we talk about trains, buses, sidewalks, roads, bike paths. Sounds like internet is another multimodal method of transportation. Helps folks get to work, helps folks get to shopping, helps folks get to school, helps folks get to doctors, etc. So yes, that's definitely a true statement.
It is. It is. Thank you. Okay, if it's nothing else, thank all of the attendees for your time and interest. As Ms. Shepherd said, the presentation, if you were on here, we are definitely going to disseminate it. And as always, thank all of you for your time and your energy. Continue to stay safe. Southern cities, that's the objective. Not that the rest of Dallas County, but needs a little bit more attention. And so I appreciate all of those involved. Thank you, Ms. Shepherd. If it's nothing else, you and your team, thank you very much. And we can consider this meeting adjourned until Laura Freeman and the Dallas County Transportation Management Association at the next presentation. Thanks to all of you. Okay, we're adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.